Buenas tardes, siendo las 18:02 horas, les saluda el profesor Cristian Cristóful del Departamento de Lengua Inglesa del Instituto Superior de Lenguas en calidad de moderador. Se da inicio a la defensa virtual de Tesina acorde a la resolución número 1337/2025 que fija conformación de mesa examinadora de la tesina con el título The Elusive Nature of Free Will, a Moral Philosophical Analysis of the Novel A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, a cargo de los autores Tania Beatriz Martínez Echauri y Jesús Alejandro Martínez Echauri, de la carrera de Lengua Inglesa del Instituto Superior de Lenguas, el día de hoy, viernes 8 de mayo del 2026. En calidad de miembros del Tribunal Examinador, saludamos al profesor Ignacio Jiménez en calidad de presidente de mesa y a los profesores José Alonso Navarro y al profesor Ángel Aquino. Muy buenas tardes, profesores, y buenas tardes, postulantes universitarios también. Entonces, la defensa o el manejo de la defensa ahora queda en manos del presidente, el profesor Ignacio Jiménez. We cannot hear you, professor. No?
No, maybe his microphone is off. Maybe he should turn it on a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, now we can. We can hear you now, Professor. Go ahead, please.
One
Sorry
thing
about
that I forgot to tell you is that your cameras must be on during the whole presentation. I am the only one who is excused to turn the camera off in this case. Okay, go ahead, Professor.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Professor, and thank you, Tania and Jesus, for inviting us to participate in your dissertation. You will now have 30 minutes to present your project, and after that, we will ask you some questions. Following that, you will be asked to leave the meeting, and we will call you back to announce the grade. Okay? So the microphone is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. I will start the presentation. So welcome everyone. My name is Tania Martinez and I'm here with Jesús Martinez. We are both going to present our thesis, The Elusive Nature of Free Will, a moral philosophical analysis of the novel A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. We produced this work under tutor Professor Leonardo Sandoval.
All right. I will now tell you why we picked this novel and the approach that we are using. The novel Clockwork Orange was picked because of a technique that I used on a person that strips them of their moral autonomy, which gives us a more or less controlled experiment as to what free will is and how it connects to moral responsibility and punishment. Our approach is more philosophical, which means that literature and philosophy are intrinsically linked. The way this works is that we read the novel, note down the questions as they arise, and then test the ideas of the author against established thinkers.
So we have different objectives for this work. The general objective is to examine A Clockwork Orange as an inquirer into free will, what it entails, what's the meaning of moral responsibility, and how they link back to punishment. Out of this general objective, we can have three specific objectives. The first one is to analyze Alex's exploration of free will in order to understand the nature of free will and its impact on moral responsibility. The second is to explore the different interpretations of moral responsibility within the novel and understand how they connect back to punishment. And the third one is to examine the nature and purpose of punishment through the different changes that Alex is experiencing during and after his crime sentence.
We have three main research questions, and they all correlate to different stages that the main character Alex goes through in the novel. The first question we have is, what does Alex's exploration of freedom of choice say about the nature of free will and its impact on moral responsibility? How does the novel walk the reader through the different interpretations of moral responsibility in order to create a connection to punishment? And lastly, what does the result of his treatment say about the nature and purpose of punishment?
Regarding the type of study, this is a literary analysis using the moral philosophical approach that Jesus introduced at the beginning. We basically take the novel as the primary source for philosophical inquiry, and we select different philosophers. We take the framework of their philosophies in order to analyze the novel through these lenses. Regarding data collection, this is descriptive and qualitative. That means that we are not trying to resolve any of the questions here. We are trying to describe the different issues and describe what these different philosophers have to say about the issues within the novel. We selected these philosophers based on two criteria. First of all, how directly they speak to the issues that were raised within the novel. And second, if they have contrasting ideas, because most of the time when you are encountering complex ideas, you want to be looking at it from different angles and contrasting angles in order to delimit the meaning and the implications of the ideas.
As for significance, what we're doing here is we're poking and prodding at an assumption that lies at the base of not only modern institutions, but a lot of other things, I'd say, which is the idea that people freely choose their actions. How significant that is, well, I think it depends on on who you are, but I think it's important to do it every now and then at least. And as for limitations, well, it's the same as always, no money and resources, or rather time and resources. But even if we had all the time in the world and all the resources in the world, and we included every philosopher and every idea followed to its natural conclusion, moral analysis is inherently subjective. So you will walk away with your very own interpretation of our work, regardless of anything.
Okay, so in order to understand the novel, we also need to understand what is the historical background in which it was written. For context, the novel was written in 1961. The author was born in England. So we want to examine what England looked like back then. And there are many ways that we can describe the socioeconomic situation. One word that we decided to use was decay, because England was basically coming out of two world wars. It was letting go of its previous global dominance. It was full with debt. It was going through rationing, and it had the burden of rebuilding a nation. So during this time, there was a lot of alternating political parties, and also there were a lot of public policies that were introduced, some of them more popular than others. This is where we see the creation, for example, of the National Health Service. This is where we see also an expansion of the social security policies. And we also see the nationalization of different industries, including the Bank of England. And this is where Burgess starts to see how the government is slowly dominating different areas of public life. And the question arises, if the government can dictate economic policies, organize healthcare, and decide how wealth is distributed, could it also not attempt to regulate human behavior?
As I stated before, Alex, the main character, goes through three main stages throughout the novel. At first, he is a free agent without moral value, and he behaves pretty much like a Viking in a Christian monastery. He is pillaging, he is raping, he's imposing violence on just about everybody around him. And he does it, quote, "What I do because I like to do." So there you have it, that's who he is. After that, he is imprisoned and is stripped of various freedoms, physical and metaphysical. And he makes the comment of, "Am I to be like a clockwork orange? And I'd like for you to keep that image of mine, something that is organic, but on the inside is mechanical or manufactured." After he is released from prison and many other things, he becomes a more or less free agent with more or less moral values. I say more or less because it's not really clear whether he has moral values or not. And we'll actually be talking about if he ever is rehabilitated or not. But for the sake of the stage, he is indeed free and with moral values.
So before we continue to actually analyzing the novel, I want to introduce some frameworks, some philosophical frameworks that we're going to be using to analyze Alex in the different stages that Jesus was mentioning. And the first philosopher that I want to bring up is Descartes. Descartes equated freedom to the ability to choose between right and wrong. One of the main things that defined Descartes is the fact that he was also a religious person. So that means that he really needed to equate religion with the idea of moral responsibility and freedom. And this is because in religion and in many different aspects, there is an idea of a deterministic world. So that means that everything is already predetermined. In this sense, for example, we can say God already knows everything that you're gonna do. So where is the space for freedom if everything is written already? So Descartes was really trying to equate these two ideas, the idea that God knows everything that will happen, but you still have the free will to choose. And he said that free will is basically the ability to commit sin. Hume, on the other side, he says that freedom is not really tied to morality, it's not really tied to right or wrong. It is tied to whether you can take decisions, you can make decisions without external interference. And one of the most interesting things about Hume specifically is that whenever he talked about external interference, he meant physical interference, oppression, coercion, or violence. He really didn't speak a lot about other ways in which someone can influence your decision or societal structures can influence your decision. But we're going to talk into that a little bit further. The third philosopher that we want to bring is Aquinas. So Aquinas says that freedom is about rational deliberation. So this means that you need to be able to think through a decision, then make a decision, and that's when you can really say, I was free to make this decision. He makes this separation between human acts, which were actually thought through and were deliberate, and acts of a man, which are more immediate, more impulsive actions that you take. This is not mentioned in the thesis, but those who are familiar with slow thinking and fast thinking, this is basically system 1 and system 2. One of them is immediate and is reactive, and the other one is more thoughtful. So he says that if you're reacting and you're acting on impulse, you're committing an act of a man and you're not really morally responsible for that because that was your first impulse. You're only morally responsible for human acts, the ones that you thought through and you still decided to make that action. The fourth person that we want to bring is not really a philosopher, it's a neuroscientist. In the 80s, he made a study. The study was basically trying to measure whether participants are aware or not of the decisions that they are making. In order to do this, he set out participants to decide to move their hand. So participants needed to decide to move their hand and also needed to record the exact moment in which they took that decision. And what he realized is that the brain is already taking a lot of activity, making a lot of activities before they even become aware of the fact that they decided to move their hand. So this basically suggested that people at the unconscious level already make decisions that then they become aware at the conscious level. And Sam Harris, the last one that we want to quote here, basically latched onto this idea to say that free will is an illusion. We have no free will because every decision that we make is cause and effect. And we have no way of controlling the causes that came prior to us. We have no way of choosing where we were born, in which family we were born into, or what was our upbringing. So we cannot be morally responsible of our current situation if we have no control over either of these factors. So one way of tying all of this up is also bringing up the idea of compatibilism versus incompatibilism. Going back to Descartes, I mentioned that there is the idea of the predetermined world. So compatibilism basically says that you can have a predetermined world and at the same time you can have a space for free will. So people are still free even though everything is written. And incompatibilism says the opposite. Since everything is predetermined, you don't have a space for free will, therefore you don't have free will. This is Harry's position regarding this subject?
As for moral responsibility, I would like to talk to you about 4 trains of thoughts, let's say. First is Strawson, who believes that freedom is the precondition for autonomy. So if you have the freedom to think, to analyze, to ponder, you have autonomy, and only then may you be judged fairly for your actions. If you have no autonomy, if you have no freedom, and you only do what is available for you to do, then can you really be judged morally for your actions? After that is Kant, who believes that morality requires rational autonomy. His whole idea essentially is that you should do unto others what you like them to do unto you. But pertinent to our study is the idea that a moral act only has value if it is chosen. That's the idea. If you choose to do something, then it has value, then it has merit and can be judged accordingly. Again, if you only do the thing that there is to do because you can do nothing else, you can't really be judged morally for it, presumably. After that is Harris, who believes that individuals are not responsible, but society is, which it's a bit of a volatile idea, or rather unstable idea, because if you take the responsibility away from the individual, but reinstate it at a societal level, understanding that society is made up of individuals, how does that really work? Who is responsible for your actions? If you're not responsible as an individual, then who is? Is it society? After that is Rand, who believes in rational self-interest. So you don't owe a single thing to any yourself, and your morality is really only there to serve your own happiness. Throughout all of these,
Sorry.
That's all right. Throughout all of this, the main question that arises is if responsibility is uncertain, then what is the role of punishment? Now you may proceed. Nietzsche splits punishment into 2 questions: where it comes from and what purpose has been assigned to it. He says that punishment is the will to power. If you have been offended, then you seek to impose suffering on those who have offended you. Not necessarily in an eye for an eye way, but you just want to see them suffer because it's gratifying to you. This is, of course, very animalistic, no? So justice is the rationalization that we give ourselves to make us more comfortable. Maybe because it is animalistic in nature, Western institutions do not accept this as a way of thinking. So they give you a lot of justifications or uses for punishment. The first of them is deterrence. In order for deterrence to work as a punishment, it needs to be immediate and it needs to be severe. An example of this would be if you're a child and your mother says, don't touch the hot stove, and then you touch it and it burns, you are deterred from touching it again. In reality, it doesn't work like that though. If you commit a crime today, you get caught maybe in 2 weeks, and then 65 business days later, you have a court date, and then you receive a sentence, and then you get your punishment. A long time after the fact. It's not immediate, maybe it's not severe. It doesn't really serve as punishment, let's say. After that is retribution, that sees suffering as a moral debt that you incur when you commit an act against somebody. This relies on proportionality because it is a debt, so it should be proportional. The issue is that a lot of times people just want to condemn the person, not necessarily punish the act. And so if you're a particularly disliked individual, regardless of what type of crime you committed, your punishment will be more severe than it ought to be because people want to condemn you, not really the crime that you have committed. As for incapacitation, it centers removing the offender from society. So if you steal a piece of bread in order to eat, you get sent off to a permanent prison, removed from society completely. The issue is that regardless of what your crime is, you're placed next to people who are murderers and rapists and so on and so forth. And what this does in practice is it just puts you in a cycle of never-ending violence and ever-worsening violence. You may come in there as a somewhat innocent, or rather innocent person, excuse me. And as the years and days and so on go by, you become more and more and more violent because of your environment. Because of the chance that you might reoffend later on, which is not really fair, I don't think. Lastly is rehabilitation. In order for rehabilitation to work, a lot of things need to go right. First of all, the person needs to believe that they are capable of change. You need a system that is willing to work with that belief that this person can change. And after, they need to be released into a society that does not lead them to reoffend. If one of these things fail, the whole thing fails. Of note is that none of these really survive contact with reality, neither in real life or in the book.
So here is where we actually start analyzing the novel. The first line in the novel reads, "What is it going to be?" So I think that this is very important, since the first moment that you read the novel, you're already encountered with this question. And it is a question. It is not a particular sentence that is saying what is going to happen, but it actually questions the reader. What is it going to be? And in this first part of the novel, in which at the beginning we decided that this is where Alex was a free agent without moral values, we actually started to see throughout the course of this thesis that this might not be the case. After reading about the different philosophers and applying the different philosophical frameworks to this particular first stage of Alex, we realized that maybe he wasn't as free as he thought he was. And the first philosopher that I will call here is Hume again. So we can see that Alex Pleasure follows his own internal desires. And I'm talking about Alex Pleasure not just in terms of his seek of violence, but also his seek of music and art and different endeavors that he follows throughout the novel. Most of these are desires that are coming from within him. And we can see this. But at the same time, we can see that these are immediate desires. It's not that he was thinking through every single action. It was more like just following his feelings. So in this way, if we analyze it through Hume's lens, we can say, yes, he was free because he was following his own internal desires. But if we go to Nietzsche, for example, we can see that Alex's violence is more an exercise of the will to power. Alex is a teenager at the end of the day. He is trying to figure out his own identity. He's trying to figure out what's his place in the world. And the way that he found to do this is through violence, through dominance. And we can see this at different levels. First, at the family level, his parents were very detached of him, but they were very afraid of him as well, because he received certain pleasure by just scaring his parents. And he received the same type of pleasure by scaring, for example, other gang members or even his own gang members that he was aggressive with and he was trying to dominate him. And this is one of the quotes that I selected for this particular purpose, because he wanted everyone to know who was the master and leader. The third philosopher is Aquinas. For Aquinas, Alex's violence has no deliberation. And this is very interesting because Alex is actually not the only person who is like this. In this England that Borges created, every single youth is going through the same type of processes. Everyone is violent, everyone is creating their own gangs, and everyone is trying to assert dominance over others. So yes, we can say that they are free because they are following their own internal desires, but we need to look beyond that and also see what is causing these different desires and why is society at large and youth at large going through the same processes. And that is where we arrive to Harris, where we can say Alex's violence arises from events that are beyond his awareness. Because Alex, throughout this entire stage, he thinks that he is free, but he's not seeing that he is part of the same system that he thinks that he's fighting. And we can see this in the Gaceta, specifically in the newspapers, because you can see in the newspapers, they are the usual about ultra-violence and bank robberies and strikes and footballers making everyone paralytic with fright. And also there were more pastry, bigger stereo TV screens, and offers of free packets of snowflakes. So this was the normal for everyone in this society. It was the normal for young people to be violent and aggressive, and it was normal for adults to be scared of them. And we can also go into a long rant about how the newspaper is basically putting together violence with consumerism in order to hide the story away. But we're not going to go into there. What I want to bring up, though, is Foucault's idea that power does not need to be explicit. It works through normalization. So this behavior is normalized throughout different societal structures, and I will quickly go through them. The first one is family units that I mentioned. Parents are scared of their children. Parents basically let their children do what they want to do most of the time. They have no control over their kids. And you can see the same thing in schools. Alex even mentions that most of the teachers, they are too lenient on students. And he says that one way in which schools can actually control young people is through violence. So this is the mind of a person that is already living in violence, and he thinks that the correct response to that is more violence, but from institutions. And you can see the same thing in law enforcement, because at some moment in the novel, you can see the transformations of gang members to policemen, and the only difference between these two is the uniform. So even the policemen are acting like gang members, and the police enforcement and law enforcement just becomes the biggest gang that also has weapons with them. And at the government level, you can see that they are not really trying to resolve the issue. They are actually using this issue as a leverage to gain popularity, because the political party knows that youth violence is an issue, but they are not trying to resolve it. They are just trying to create bandage solutions. So they can say, vote for us, we're going to solve this problem by XYZ way. But the whole idea here is that they are just exploiting this. And in most cases, they are actually cultivating this type of behavior from young people.
Now, state intervention, as it has been pointed out, starts from the very beginning of your life, no? But in the case of Alex, it goes a little bit deeper. He gets to go through what is known as the Ludovico technique, which essentially strips him of his moral autonomy. And they do this by inducing in him a tremendous debilitating sense of nausea, after which they show him, or rather force him to watch, images of violence with the express purpose of conditioning him, no? So that when he thinks about violence, he gets this overwhelming sense of nausea and cannot get out of it until he chooses to switch to a diametrically opposed attitude. What is the result of this? I would say that the result of this is a political peon, but is he at least virtuous? Well, Kant would say no, he is not virtuous at all, because he can no longer choose. He turns into a little machine capable only of good, but that's all that he can do. And remember, if you only do the thing that you think is the only thing to do, you're not really virtuous. Your actions have no moral charge to them, and therefore mean pretty much nothing. Foucault look at this through the lenses of biopolitics, in which the state exerts power within the individual through the means of medicine. If you recall the image that I asked you to ponder, which was an orange that was mechanical on the inside, or something organic that within is completely manufactured, this is a pretty good example. Because Alex looks like a person, but he has been completely reprogrammed inside. So he looks like a person, but it's only as a tool of the state, pretty much. Now, as for the types of punishment that exist, and as far as incapacitation goes, it doesn't really work. If you recall, incapacitation revolves around the removal of the subject from society. But if you cram criminals together, they don't get better. They get worse. They commit crime against each other, and so the cycle of violence continues to worsen. As far as retribution goes, again, it does not work because it relies on proportionality. And if you cram criminals together where all they receive is violence from all sources, they'll just become more violent. Suffering doesn't stop or doesn't get better. They definitely don't get rehabilitated that way. They just continue to suffer and impose suffering on each other. There is no, to me, in my opinion, no deterrence at all in the society that is presented in the book. Anybody can do whatever they want to do until they do it in front of a policeman and then they get caught. But realistically, there is no deterrence in the youth to do whatever they want to do. As it has been said before, this is the way every teenager is. Alex is not a singularity. He is pretty normal, all things considered. So everybody is doing whatever they want to do, no matter how violent it is. Now, rehabilitation. This is interesting, no? Because theoretically, Alex should be rehabilitated, no? He undergoes the Ludovico technique and he no longer can do anything that is even remotely violent. But in reality, if you recall the 3 steps I named in rehabilitation, he is released into the very same society that made him who he was and made him be able really to exert all that kind of violence. So as soon as he gets out, what happens to him? He gets beat up multiple times by multiple people because society is still just as violent as it was before he went in. So there is no possibility for rehabilitation for him.
And in the third part of the novel, there is a difference here because you have the American version of the novel that eliminated the last chapter, and then you have the British version of the novel that kept this last chapter. So after Alex was released and after everything that happened to him, he came back to his normal life. He received a job from the government. He also started his own gang again with different members. And he was exerting the same kind of violence. He was committing the same type of crimes. And he was just following his life through this cycle. And during this cycle is that one day he starts seeing this vision, and I actually quote this vision here. He starts seeing this vision that he gets home to a good hot plate of dinner, and there is a woman waiting for him, and in the other room there is a baby. And he knew what was happening to him. It was growing up. And I bring this up because at one moment we also thought with Jesus that at the end of the novel, he became a moral agent. So he had the free will to choose, and then he decided to choose to become a good person. But we can see in this quote that there was not really a deliberation there. It was just an immediate switch that went into his head. He said to himself, I'm old enough to start a family. I will start a family now. So in this case, for example, we are still trying to debate whether this actually shows that Alex is free or not. Because if you look at Hume, for example, you can say, yes, he is free. He is now following a new desire that he has. But if you look at Aquinas, he is not, because he didn't have a deliberation. Now it's just a matter of biology. He's just a mature person now, and he's wanting what a mature person wants. And the second quote that I want to bring here is when Alex is thinking about his own son, because we are seeing this cycle of violence that Alex went through, and he's thinking to himself, when my kid is old enough, I will explain everything to him, but probably he will not understand or will not want to understand, and he will go through the same cycle of violence. And maybe as Alex committed this crime, maybe my kid will also murder another person. And Alex says, I will not be able to stop him. And my kid will not be able to stop his own sons from committing this type of crimes and from going through this type of violence. And he finishes with, it will eat it onto the end of the world, round and round and round. So this is what we call the cycle of determinism, because Alex, in our idea, after applying all of these philosophical frameworks, did not really exhibit freedom. And when he's thinking about his own kids and his grandsons, they are going through the same cycle again. Nothing is going to be broken. This is all part of the same system, and they are just going to be repeating the same mistakes over and over again until they grow up, and then they decide to create their own families.
I will present to you our 3 findings. In terms of free will, there is not a single part of the novel that shows us without an ounce of ambiguity that Alex is choosing for himself. Choice is illusory across all of the stages of life, pretty much, right up until the very end when we're with him. As for moral responsibility, again, he does not choose at any moment. So morality without choice is just compliance, right? It's not really virtue. He does not become anything else than what he was at the beginning. His singular choice that is presented to him just changes. And as for punishment, as we have said, this is a cycle of violence that goes on until the end of the world. No system of punishment, no justification for it, no role assigned to it, changes this fundamental reality of their world, which is to be a violent landscape where all violence and punishment just serves to maintain the powers that be. And at best, you may be a political pawn, but that's about it.
And there are 3 implications that we wanted to explore at the end of the thesis. And the first one is overt versus covert conditioning, because I think that the Ludovicos technique is the overt version of conditioning. This is not an allegory. It's very, very overt in the sense that they take Alex, they force him to go through this medical procedure, and they alterate how he reacts towards violence. And we thought that this was the end of it at the novel. But actually, when you start analyzing the first part of the novel, you see that there is a lot of covert conditioning as well happening in society. I explored this at the beginning when I was talking about Foucault and how this entire circle of violence is basically normalized in society. So there are ways in which we can discuss covert conditioning that are happening nowadays and that is also relevant today. Because the bad thing about covert conditioning is that participants may not know that they are being conditioned, and in some ways they can be willing to this condition. And we can bring this up, for example, to algorithms that we're using nowadays or to AI that we're using nowadays, in which we basically offload the burden of thinking and the burden of making decisions towards these other tools. And we're basically being conditioned to desire the use of external tools to make decisions versus making our own decisions ourselves. So this is, and the novel shows that this is a far more dangerous way of conditioning than just something overt like the Ludovicos technique. The second implication is, what is the purpose of punishment in a world without morality? And this is something that was explained by Jesús extensively. But the basic idea of punishment is that you're bringing people who made the choice to commit these crimes, and you're trying to either change them, rehabilitate them, or take them away from society so they don't commit this type of crimes again. But if they are really not morally responsible, if they are really not making the decision of making these crimes, they are pushed by their circumstances, they are pushed by their brain physiology, they are pushed by causes that are outside their control, then whatever type of punishment we enforce will not really be acting on the cause of the crime. And this is true for many things, not just for the justice system, because society at large might not be able to survive the death of free will or the idea that we are free agents. We construct our entire identities on the fact that we're able to make decisions. All of our life decisions are made this way, thinking that we are, in fact, free, and we communicate to each other like that. We relate to each other like that. So there is no way that we have imagined a universe without free will. And I like to end this presentation with the same quote that the book starts with. What is it going to be then? Because even though we present all of this information to you, at the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve with this thesis is not to resolve to resolve the question of whether we have free will or not. It's actually to let you sit with this question itself and let you decide what you want it to be. So you can do your own research and see if we have free will or not and how we as a society can survive that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tania, and thank you, Jesus, for your presentation. Now we are moving forward with some questions by the panel. And I don't know if Professor Alonso or Professor Aquino would like to start. Mr. Aquino, your microphone is off.
If you let me, Professor Alonso, I will start off by asking a couple of questions. I've been to many mesa examinadoras in the past, like 20, but this is the first time in which a pair of students present their dissertation on this approach. So my question to you is, why didn't you choose the historical approach? Because according to what you said, Tania, you took 1 decade in England and you could have done much better job in terms of the historical approach, but you pretty much pushed yourself to your limits in order to do this approach. So I want to know what was behind that, because it's quite interesting. The mythological, moral, philosophical approach is not that quite common, so to speak. So let me know, why do you choose this one?
Okay, I can start. Jesus, feel free to jump in case you want to also respond to this. But the whole idea of analyzing A Clockwork Orange was to analyze the philosophical implications. I do understand, and we were plenty aware that it is not an usual methodology to do a literary analysis. But I think that in classical education, philosophy and literature were actually united, and this was much more usual before than it is nowadays. We could have gone with the historical approach, but the core ideas that we wanted to explore, for example, whether free will exists or not, and how punishment really addresses the question of free will and moral responsibility, could not have been explored simply by introducing a historical approach.
Okay. Professor Alonso, as well as Professor Jimenez, and everybody here know that you get to compare or relate things. So if you take your dissertation and the book, how can you relate that, the text, to another text? That's question number 1. How can you relate that text to the world? And how can you relate that text to yourself? So text to text, text to world, and text to yourself.
Okay, so this is actually one of the comments that came when we first presented the thesis itself, which was, can you include other novels as well to compare it? I think that the easiest comparison will be another dystopian novel, for example, that explores the idea of what happens when a government grows really fast and becomes totalitarian and it starts to control the life of the people. So you could go easily with 1984, for example. You could go easily with Brave New World. And I think that one of the professors also actually introduced me to this novel, Calocane, which was related to specifically how the government can use medicine to change the behavior of people. We could have gone that way as well, and that is one of the easiest comparisons that I can think of. The reason why we didn't include that was because the thesis itself was becoming very bloated with information, and we really needed to be deliberate about the things that we included. That is to answer the first part, which was the novel, text to text. The second one was text to world. And we try to cover this in the implication section, specifically how this relates to everything that we're living nowadays. How, even though Anthony Burgess was talking about something like the Ludovicos technique, you can still have this idea of covert conditioning and how the government or different institutions can still try to change the way that you behave, change your behavior without you noticing it. So that's the part in which we try to relate all of this back to the real world and what are the implications of the novel and how you can apply the ideas of the novel to the real world. And at the personal level, it is the same question. Do you believe in free will or not? And how does it affect you personally? And how does it affect the way that you perceive yourself or you perceive others and you perceive how they are making decisions or you're making decisions? And this, since it is impossible to change an entire society on what you personally think, it is really a question and an answer that stays within yourself and how you approach life.
Thank you very much. This is a question for Jesus. And I really liked the two quotes by Harris. Free will is an illusion, and individuals are not responsible, but society is. Can you explain how these quotes relate to your dissertation, Jesus?
Well, one of the main things that you can see in the society presented in the book is that it is a highly manufactured society. Every stage of life is manufactured, from youth to adolescence to adulthood, and then on and on. Everything is manufactured. The spaces that you find yourself in are manufactured. Even the political opposition, I go as far as to say, is manufactured. Everything is just done in that way in order to keep the power as it is, maintain the status quo. No, so these individuals are not really responsible, let's say, for their actions because they find themselves in a completely manufactured surrounding. So it is made for them to act a certain way, and then they are given different avenues to go through life, believing that they have a choice. So the political opposition is made up so they can think that if they get fed up with you, I can vote for that person over there. If you're a gang member, you either go to jail or you become a policeman. You know, things like these really betray the reality that it is manufactured completely, right? Which again, if you recall, the vision of something that appears organic, but really within is completely manufactured. This is just another example of that. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much, Jesus. Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Aquino, for your questions. Professor Alonso, would you like to continue?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. First, I'd like to make a comment, and then I'm going to ask some questions, okay? Tania, Jesus, I would like to recommend to you very strongly some books that deal very specifically with the concepts of free will, okay? This is only a recommendation, okay? And the first book is titled De Libero Arbitrio Voluntatis. Okay, in English, the title would be translated as On Free Choice of the Will. I think this is a very interesting book. Okay, and this is a book by Augustine of Hippo, which seeks to resolve the problem of evil in Christianity by asserting that free will is the cause of all suffering. Okay, this book is structured as a dialogue between Augustine and his companion Evodius. Okay, it includes several topics and this is quite interesting as well, it really includes an attempted proof of the existence of God. This is the first book that I would like you both to recommend, okay? The second book is De Libero Arbitrio Diatrebe Sive Collatio. And, the title could be translated as Of Free Will, Discourses or Comparison. This is the Latin title of a work written by Desiderius Erasmus of Rotterdam in 1524, okay? A quite interesting and engaging book because this book was basically written to refute a specific teaching of Martin Luther on the question of free will, when the latter had become increasingly aggressive in his attacks on the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, and listen to that, because the proposition, one of the main propositions, is quite good. He says that, okay, Luther said that free will after sin is a matter of title only. As long as one does what is in him, one sins mortally. And the third book, because I don't want to extend too much, the third book is called The Freedom of the Will. And this work was written by a Christian reformer and theologian, Jonathan Edwards. It was first published in 1754. It was written in the 18th century, and it examines the nature of humanity's will. The book takes the classic Calvinist viewpoints on total depravity of the will and the need of humanity for God's grace in salvation. These are the three books that I strongly recommend to all of you, to both of you. Okay, if you wish to follow this recommendation, I think that these three books, specifically tackle, the nature of free will as an important philosophical concept. And now the questions. This question is for Tania. Okay, Tania, how did you connect Foucault's ideas on state control and punishment with the role of the state in Burgess's Clockwork Orange when it tries to punish Alex?
Yes, so let me phrase it back to you. Basically, how Foucault idea of punishment connects back to the punishment that Alex went through.
That is right.
Yeah, so one of the ideas that we brought up here, and I think it was also your suggestion, was the idea of biopolitics and basically how the government can use medicine in order to change how people behave. I think that one of the main ways to connect Foucault with this is the fact that the government at some moment tried to, first of all, lock people up in order to avoid them from committing crimes. But since this was only increasing the amount of crimes that they were committing, and the prisons were cramming and they didn't have any more space, the new government tried to wash I don't know how to say this in any other way, but to wash their face, basically, because they were going under a lot of attacks because of the violence that they were committing against the prisoners and the fact that the current justice system was not really working in rehabilitating people. So they introduced the idea of Ludovico's technique in order to change how people behaved. And in this way, for example, you can see throughout the novel that there are many people, especially within the prison, that are against this idea. This is coming completely from the government to them, and they just have to execute it, even though they did not agree with this. So throughout the entire process, they think that Alex can be rehabilitated in 2 weeks, and then he can go back to society and he can become a good citizen, basically. And they want to do this to every single prisoner. And Alex is just the first one that they are trying this with. And what you can see here is something that Jesus also mentioned, that morality without freedom of choice is basically compliance. And what we can read through the lines here is that the government was really trying to create an amount of citizens that are compliant with whatever they want to do. So in this case, for example, we can see the idea of biopolitics applied in the novel in order to not mitigate crime, in order not to become a better society, but in order to control the society and make sure that the current power stays in power for a long time.
Okay, quite good. The next question is for Jesus. Jesus, the book is partially written in a kind of Russian-influenced slang. It's natsat, which obviously takes its name from the Russian suffix that is equivalent, if I am not mistaken, to teen in English. Jesus, in your opinion, how much importance do you give to the role of language in the book in connection to the concepts of free will and freedom? How important is the use of the language, and roughly speaking, in the whole novel?
It's important to understand, I think, that culture is a very, very strong identifier with people. So your culture identifies you and allows you to relate to others. No? Again, as I said before, every part of society is manufactured in the book and maybe even in real life as well. But it's manufactured as a way to push certain ideas, to allow people to describe certain ideas better, and to subdue other ideas via language, no? So it is understood that this slang that they use, that they think they're being rebellious by using, is actually just another creation of the state. No, it was manufactured for them in order for them to use to further the ideas of the government, to again push them in certain directions and give them certain ways to express very particular and special ideas that benefit the status quo. That's my answer.
Okay, good. Tania, Jean-Paul Sartre once said, if I'm not mistaken, we are condemned to be free. And this is very clear that Sartre spoke a lot about freedom in most of his books. But do you have any idea if Sartre spoke about punishment as well in relationship to the state?
I am not very familiar with Sartre's opinion on punishment and the state.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jesus, and this is my last question. Jesus, do you think that are we controlled by the state? Was Burgess trying to tell us something?
Well, controlled, I don't know, but it is, I think, clear to anybody who thinks about it that we are indeed susceptible to influences that are outside of our view and our ability to conceptualize, unless we think about them. One of the main reasons why in wannabe totalitarian governments, the first thing they try to do is to defund education, no? They try to take away your ability to think rationally about things. Because if you were to stop to think rationally about things, you would be able to realize eventually that, you know, your position among others and your position in the material reality that surrounds you. If you are not able to do that, then, as it is seen in the book, you can find yourself in situations or in spaces that push you to behave certain ways, and then you have certain avenues presented to you that you can go into, and you essentially enter a conveyor belt or a manufacturing process, let's say. So are we controlled by the government? No, maybe. There's no definitive answer. I think it is an individual choice that we make every day, whether to think critically about our actions and our place in the world, or whether to do the opposite and just not think at all.
Okay, thank you very much. No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Alonso, for your questions. And now it's my turn. I would like to ask both of you about your analysis in general. Did you find it difficult to stay away from a subjective interpretation, since you were dealing with very philosophical aspects of the analysis? What techniques or how did you measure whether you were being too subjective or not in your analysis?
I can go first, and then Jesus, you can jump in. But yes, it was very difficult to keep our subjective ideas. At least for me, it was very difficult because I'm a very opinionated person. So whenever I was encountering these ideas, I really wanted to refute them or put my own ideas there. What really helped me throughout this entire thesis process was to make the thesis as descriptive as possible. And this is something that I kept reminding myself. This is not a prescriptive thesis in which I'm trying to tell you the answer and I'm trying to tell you how to think about it. I'm just describing what these different philosophers and these different thinkers say about these matters and how they would analyze the novel itself. So in that way, for me, it was really trying to get into the mindset of every single one of the philosophers after reading their work and trying to analyze the work through their lenses. So in order to keep myself away from that and in order to just describe what I'm seeing instead of trying to prescribe how anyone should think about these matters.
My answer would be very, very similar because I am also a very opinionated person. I would even go as far as to say I'm even more opinionated than my sister. But the thing to consider here and the thing to keep in mind is that I'm just showing you things. I'm not here to tell you what to think or how to think it or how to arrive at it or so on and so forth. I'm just showing you what other people have to say about it. And it just happens to be that the topic at hand is very subjective.
Thank you. And another question, and the last one. It has to do with the novel itself and your opinion about it. Do you really think that Alex changed by the end of the novel or not?
I will go first, and I will say this very painfully because I really like how the novel ended, and I really like the idea that Alex did change. But after going through this analysis and actually understanding better what is free will, what is moral responsibility, I cannot say for sure, yes, Alex has changed and he has become a better person at the end of the novel. So my first intuition was to say, yes, of course, he became a better person. After going through this thesis work, I can say not really. He doesn't show that he was being deliberate about this decision.
I would say no as well. It does not change at all. The thing to understand here, and the reason why I say no rather, is that at the beginning of the novel, it's not that he is a tremendously evil person necessarily. It's just that he is behaving in normal ways. No? If you're familiar with the concept of the banality of evil, then there you go. That's all that matters. It's the normalization of evil, and then normal people begin to carry out evil acts. What happens at the end is that his way, that is the way that he is allowed to exist, changes. Now he has entered adulthood, and he is no longer allowed socially to be this violent wrecking ball. Now he has to be a family person, family-oriented person, and is no longer allowed to exercise such levels of violence. So no, he hasn't changed, but his way of existing has, not through his own decision or his own deliberation, but through what is afforded to him by the government.
Thank you both. And I think we are done with the round of questions. So now we need to debate about your grade, and we will ask you to leave the meeting, please. And when we are ready, we will send you a message to join again.